And now leaving the stage to Stacy Scott, who is head of accessibility at Taylor & Francis, that will tell us about what Taylor & Francis is doing to prepare for the European Accessibility Act. Please, Stacy.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me. I am the fifth speaker, so apologies if I say anything that has already been covered. So I will talk more broadly about the work of Taylor & Francis rather than the detail that we've heard so brilliantly from our speakers up until now. I'll also give your eyes a rest from slides, so I'll just talk, so you can feel free to look at me, look at somewhere else in the room, or look at the translation. And so I've worked in accessible publishing and inclusive education for around 20 years now. I currently wear several accessibility hats, the main one being head of accessibility for Taylor & Francis, and the other being the chair of the Publishing Accessibility Action Group. Taylor & Francis is a scholarly publisher, quite large, and we publish both HSS and STEM content. And I myself, like Simon Holt, also have both personal and professional interest in accessible publishing. I am completely blind and always have been, so I very much rely on accessible solutions. So key areas of focus for the European Accessibility Action Group. So, European Accessibility Action Act, Accessibility Act. So, as Simon Holt covered very well earlier, there are many people that will be affected by accessible products and implementation of the EAA. So with this in mind, accessibility has been a huge part of Taylor & Francis' work for around 10 years now, preceding any European Accessibility Action. We very much believe that accessibility should be part of business as usual processes and shouldn't rely on legislation to push things forward. So our work continues outside of EAA compliance whilst we make sure that we are also tackling areas covered by the EAA. And those areas I'll talk about today. The first thing we did was to make sure that our internal accessibility working group was aware of the EAA and what it meant for each individual area. This allows for resource and budget planning in building that all-important business case. We devised and we are implementing a business-wide accessibility strategy to make sure that we cover all key points. Particularly in a large publisher, this is quite difficult to make sure that you don't miss anybody out. And so a huge amount of work has gone into simply making sure that all the key stakeholders are involved in the conversations. And this is why the internal accessibility working group has been so effective. Of course, we work a lot with our internal legal team as well to make sure that we have a correct interpretation as put forth by them, a hashtag I'm not a lawyer either, to make sure that we are working in the way that we think we should be and interpreting the EAA accurately. As we all know, the key challenge is often just understanding what the EAA is referring to and what you need to do. So some of the key questions that Taylor & Francis asked themselves when the EAA was announced. So what are the rules of the EAA and how does it apply to us at Taylor & Francis? What are the penalties for both us as a business, but also for our customers? What is the impact if we don't make things accessible? Analysis work. What is the gap? What are the gaps in our current offerings? And what do we need to prioritize? Another question, what are some quick wins? What can we do now? Not quick wins for us, but for our customers. What can we do to get things moving now whilst we build the processes that we need to get things moving forward? And finally, who should we be working with? And this is one of the most important areas for me, is that community. So who should we be working with to build knowledge and support in this area? So for example, the Publishing Accessibility Action Group, Daisy's Inclusive Publishing, Benetech, the W3C, and so many more, including Italy's own Lulia Foundation, who've been incredibly supportive. So the key areas that we focused on, the main areas that I call the 3 E's: ebooks, e-commerce, and e-readers. So for us, all of our EPUBs have to be in EPUB 3, and this is nearly complete. So we have in every single book that we put, that Taylor and Francis produces, is produced in both EPUB and PDF. They're reflowable, semantically enriched, and come with accessibility featured built in. This means that they are what we call born accessible. This is the ultimate goal, is to make everything that we have born accessible. So one of those key accessibility features that has been mentioned before is, of course, image description. So for us, our vendors write all of our front-end image descriptions. That is a part of the contract that we have with them. When they're producing a book, it must be complete with all alt text. And so all of our front list as of June 2024 going forward, every book will be produced with complete 100% image descriptions. These image descriptions are, of course, checked in-house and by subject matter experts and end users as well, including me. We don't solely, contrary to I guess most publishers in the space, we don't solely focus on the most popular titles, because we don't want to neglect some key areas that may not be as popular, but they're just as vital to make sure they're described. So say, for example, we might be, by focusing on the popular titles only, we might be doing a lot of HSS work, but neglecting more complex materials like STEM or medicine or music. And so we took the approach that we would look at the popular titles, but that we had to have a clear and a representation across all the different subjects to make sure that we aren't neglecting any particular group or students. One of the parts of this, and I mentioned before that the vendor is now responsible for producing image descriptions for our front end titles. And it's so important that you make sure that you are choosing the right vendors to work with. When you're having those conversations, when you're signing the contract, do they talk to you about accessibility, about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, European Accessibility Act and other? Do they understand? Is it something that's already built into their workflow? Do they have subject matter experts? These are all really important questions, because that's going to make a difference between actually this can be done and this can't. Because if you work with a vendor and they don't have any knowledge of how to do this, you're going to have to train them. And some will be more responsive than others. And so making sure that that is embedded at the very beginning of a relationship is just so important for us. Backlist has already been mentioned. So for us, our backlist is roughly about around over 170,000 books. So it's quite substantial. Allowing the vendors to input image description for front-end titles has meant that our production, editorial teams and authors can focus on filling out our backlist. And so we have multiple workflows to make sure that that happens. And again, all getting checked as well. Similar to what Simon Holt said, that we've had for about 10 years now, we've had a process where any customer can come to us and say, I need this book in an alternative format. And we aim to get that to them between 1 and 3 days. And that's hugely important, because it's the difference again between somebody being able to access vital content in their studies and somebody sitting waiting on a book with nothing else, no other resource available to them. Going on to my other e-readers, we've done ebooks, we'll look at e-readers. So again, as covered, I won't go into too much detail because I think Simon Mellon's covered this brilliantly. We decided to build our own e-reader so that we could have control over the functionality and specifically the accessibility, to make sure that it complies with the EAA, but that also that it can ingest and accurately display metadata. Another interesting example of, I guess in a way, a reader platform that hasn't actually come up, certainly by the English speakers, and I'm surprised, is partnering with institutions like Bookshare, RNIB Bookshare in the UK, Bookshare in the US by Benetech. These are really strong platforms with over 1 million books on each of them that provide those books on a fully accessible platform. And so if you're not using that accessible e-reader yet, or you're building it in-house but it's not ready, making sure that your content is available on those accessible platforms is hugely beneficial to users as well. Of course, we need to mention accessibility metadata, as Simon Mellons did, making sure that people can discover that content and they can find out, well, is this book accessible to me? Does it have what I need? Does it have image descriptions? That's a very important point before you purchase or even download a book. What you don't want is to have spent a lot of money making a book accessible and people are downloading the non-accessible copy because you haven't made it clear in the metadata that there is an accessible version available. Platforms, incredibly important, making sure that the access to the content, and again, this is where if you're not ready, you can use Bookshare, but generally your platforms and websites need to be accessible, and WCAG, so Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG compliant. And this connects very closely to e-commerce, which we've heard about, the functionality of being able to, that journey of discovering, finding, purchasing, and also the final, confirmation emails, all of that aspect, those aspects of e-commerce needs to be considered and made accessible as part of the EAA. And so that's something that obviously Taylor and Francis, we for the majority of our products, this is the case, and it certainly will be the case for the other smaller products that we have come June 2025. A way of showcasing your accessibility, showcasing what you're doing in accessibility and how you're complying with things like the EAA is really important. And so having your accessibility conformance reports, or VPATs, voluntary product accessibility templates, and accessibility statements are really, really important. Making sure that if a customer comes to you and says, can you show me your compliance level? Can you show me what you're doing in accessibility? You should be able to evidence this immediately. And so, for example, if you search Taylor and Francis corporate accessibility statement, you can read about absolutely every single thing that we're doing towards accessibility. So some other key areas, there's some that we've touched on, so ancillaries, so other content that's considered within the ebook, such as maybe flashcards, PowerPoints, videos. This is something that Taylor and Francis has decided might not be covered under the EAA specifically. We're not entirely clear on that one, but we've decided that it is, for us, it is a massive part of making sure that an ebook is, as we want to say, fully accessible. Can an ebook really be truly inclusive to everyone if part of that ebook, of the ancillary parts, are not accessible to everyone? So we decided no. Artificial intelligence already been covered, something that we're very keen to work on. Personally, as a blind person, I've found that the advancement in AI over the past year to 18 months is incredible. I certainly work with a couple of AI engines that do produce really, really detailed pictorial descriptions. And you can, using the kind of LLM model, you can also interact with those engines now to say, okay, tell me more about this aspect, or leave out the background detail, just tell me the forefront. And it's changing all the time, and I think it's one of the most exciting areas coming up. It can do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think it doesn't work as well when it comes to matters in science, technology, engineering, maths, medicine. But certainly for HSS titles, I would absolutely say that it's been, certainly the trial that we're currently running is extremely useful for us. One thing I always say though is I would never leave the engine running unattended. So that means we would never just generate our image description using AI and put it in a book and put it on the shelf, digital or otherwise, because we want to make sure that it is contextually appropriate. And as Simon Mellons talked about, we don't want it just simply be tagged. We don't want it to be repeating what's already in a paragraph. And so there's so much work going on there for so many publishers. But I think that's a really exciting area definitely to be watched over the next, probably over the next year. I think we're going to see some quite incredible things. STEM, I've mentioned STEM, medicine, including medicine and music, and mathematics obviously being a huge part of that. So we sit on many groups, our accessibility people across Taylor and Francis, and one of those is to make sure that we are inputting as much as we can to make STEM content more accessible. And now that MathML can be embedded in an EPUB and read by a screen reader, that's taken us a huge step forward. And so again, as a mathematics graduate myself, that's one of the key things that I'm keen to see going forward. So just to kind of sum up, I suppose, so by becoming fully EAA compliant, you become born accessible. And again, this is what we want. We want accessibility to be part of business as usual processes. We want everything to be born accessible and inclusive. As Simon Mellon says, born accessible, inclusivity, it's good for business. It makes sense. Why would you want to exclude 1 billion customers? I don't think anyone would want to do that. Accessibility absolutely benefits everyone. It penalizes no one. And so heading towards full compliance and full inclusion is where we need to be. The way that we need to get there, looking at future updates to W3C standards, ensuring that we have more accessible content across the board. So HSS, science, technology, engineering, math, science, all of the different areas that I've already mentioned. This can only really be done by combined effort and dedication. And this is where the power of the accessible publishing community really comes into its own. And that includes everyone on this call, all of the speakers, and everyone that I interact with on a day-to-day basis. It wouldn't be possible without that sense of community and allyship. So on that note, I will hand back, but thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today.